CAI-NJ, and I'd like to give you all of our upcoming events. Every Wednesday, Wednesdays through the end of September, we will be having our Wednesday webinars. Our Ultimate Night Out will be on August 5th. Our Leadership Development Workshop for all of the homeowner leaders will be August 5th and 6th in person at the CAI-NJ headquarters. The Community Association Virtual Roundtable will be on August 12th. The Beach Party, September 17th, and the Conference and Expo on October 21st. All of these events you can register for through our website. I would now like to welcome all of our attendees and thank our sponsors for making today's program possible. Please join me in welcoming Loren Lightman, Esquire of Hill Wallack, Sean Ahearn and Mike Luzzi of PeopleFirst Property and Casualty Services, Jamie Redden of Alliance Association Bank, Steve Morris of Morris Engineering LLC, Harold Berlowe of Denali Property Management, INC, and Ashish George of BITS Consulting. If you need a certificate for today's program, please contact Jennifer at JENNIFER@CAI-NJ.org, or you can email the CAI-NJ headquarters. Today, each of our sponsors will discuss their topics for the first 15 minutes, and any questions will be presented at the end of the event. Please put your questions into the question box at the bottom of your screen and note who you would like the question directed to. Thank you for joining us today, and we're going to get started with our program. First up, we have, please join me in welcoming Loren Lightman, Esquire of Hill Wallack. She will be discussing Adversity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Welcome, Loren.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, CAI, for having me speak. This topic that I am going to be speaking on, adversity, diversity, and inclusion, is rather broad, and it could probably warrant its own topic for a long time. I am going to give basically the highlights and points of discussion that you can bring back to your own associations in the course of day-to-day living. So to get started, I'm going to break this out really into three categories. The first is going to be provisions contained within the association's governing documents. The second will be policies and resolutions of community associations. And the third is going to be issues raised by member and resident conduct. All of these issues, by the way, I deal with day to day. And so I'm talking some from legal knowledge and some just from my own experience. But before we get to the three topics, I wanted to give some information by way of background on this whole topic of diversity and inclusion. And I wanted to draw your attention to a report that was drafted by the Foundation for Community Association Research called Creating Harmony in Diverse Communities, which was put together late last year. First of all, if you don't already know, the Foundation for Community Association Research is the research arm of Community Association National. And they are a great resource for a lot of information on relevant topics. I think they just put something out recently on opening amenities and pools and lifeguards and so forth. So if you haven't already found them, go on to CAI's website national and you can find a link to them. But the survey I'm talking about in particular late last year, they had, more managers than residents, but they had, about 1,000 people and asked about diversity and inclusion issues. And, without highlighting everything, what stands out, about half the managers reported at least one diversity or discrimination complaint. Most of the managers see an increase in these types of complaints. But to jump down to the bottom here, most managers report that there are no procedures in place to handle these types of complaints, which is really, really interesting and a little bit troubling that people in communities may or may not have, a ready resource to go to. So that's definitely something from a legal standpoint and a managerial standpoint that potentially managers need to look at along with their boards. But To jump into now, because I don't want to waste time or spend time too much on any one particular topic, I want to point out something interesting with association governing documents. So by this, I mean your declaration, your master deed, your bylaws, even perhaps your certificate of incorporation. This is potentially for older associations whose documents have not been amended in some time. There is pending legislation in New Jersey that would authorize and actually require a board of directors to go through their governing documents and remove any restrictions or covenants or conditions that place a restriction basically on purchasing or renting property based on the protected classifications contained in the New Jersey law against discrimination. Now, the NJ-LAD, as it's more informally called, is one of the strongest anti-discrimination statutes in the country. And the fact now that that would be tied to governing documents is really, it's meaningful now, because it's going to require the board to go through and, based on a board vote only, remove them. It would not require a vote of the members. So if this thing does come in, it has not been formally adopted yet, it is still pending in the legislature, then it will come to your legal counsel, and potentially it's something you're going to have to deal with in the next coming months. I will note that many of the provisions contained in governing documents already are unenforceable, so just be aware of that. To jump down now to association policies, just want to touch on a few of these. The number one up here that comes up quite frequently, holiday decoration regulations, where you really have to treat everything kind of the same. So that's why my number two here, uniformity and objectivity. Whether it's putting together a new holiday decoration, whether it is potentially enforcing collections procedures, rules, pertaining to sale, leasing of units, make sure whatever you're doing is uniform throughout, especially if you have a diverse or, different population in your community. Make sure whatever you're doing is not going to have an impact. And I'll add in here too, if you receive a request for a particular observance and you've never heard of it, make sure to look into it and engage a little bit before potentially just saying no. Just because it's something you haven't heard of doesn't mean it's something that doesn't need to be accommodated potentially. Also, one thing I want to talk about also pertaining to member and resident conduct, and Jackie, we can go to the last slide here. Before I get into addressing complaints and things that come up, I want to talk about a little on the preemptive side here. What can associations do ahead of time? For example, my law firm, Wallack, we have a committee, a diversity inclusion committee, and they address issues, and also we have training. They arrange for training, not necessarily formal like this, we already have to sit there, but just opportunities for people to engage with one another. For a minute, going back to that initial study that I talked about from the Foundation of Community Association Research, an interesting outcome of that was in communities where there were more opportunities for people to engage with one another, they found that there was less of an incidence of complaints occurring, of events that led to complaints. And also, to the extent they did occur, people were better able to talk about it amongst each other, work it out privately, rather than have to bring it to the association's management and board and so forth. So that's an interesting thing. Now with COVID, it's been a little bit difficult to arrange for that, but even having an informal barbecue or a meet and greet or something for new residents, something to make people feel engaged in the community, it was found that it cut down somewhat on the incidence of issues occurring involving diversity and inclusion. I know my time is getting into the end, but to talk about addressing complaints and procedures for review occur, I want to bring up on this slide in particular the HUD rules, Housing and Urban Development. There are federal rules now that require associations to address complaints, proactively address complaints. Years ago when you would have an incident that occurred, let's say between two residents or something, let's say happened at the pool, we'd say, just leave it. It's not for us to have to worry about. but now it is. So if you have an incident that occurs wherever it may be, even during meetings, you know, we're doing all these Zoom meetings now, and somebody throws a comment in, it's something that can't just be ignored. It's something that needs to be addressed. And if there's if there is a basis for going further, then that's something where you're going to want to consult with legal counsel and say, okay, we have this issue. What do we need to do? And not just say, hey, you know, attorney, you deal with it and tell us the outcome. Now there has to be more of an interactive process for people to deal with one another. And again, I think besides the pool, what I've been seeing also social media on here, you know, there's a higher incidence now. For example, if there's a Facebook or an Instagram page, look, if the association is running it, that's one thing. If the association is not running a Facebook page and you're getting complaints something's occurring, you know, it's hard to stop that if you're not controlling it as the association, but certainly there are steps that can be taken, such as making sure people understand that the Facebook page in question is not being run by the association, and potentially, you know, asking people in general, you know, when you communicate with one another, you know, be careful what you say, be careful what you put in writing, and be cognizant of feelings of one another. So down here on number 2, you know, have a procedure. For example, if it involves the board, maybe you go to the manager, or maybe you set up another alternative person, like someone with the covenants committee, or maybe there's a retired judge in the community or a retired mediator, and you could say, hey, would you mind being the alternate? Certainly the manager can be the primary person for receiving such complaints, but there needs to be another avenue if it involves the manager, the board, and people don't feel comfortable in that regard going to them. So you really need to think about it ahead of time before the issue occurs. And once it does, you know, this may be something for a meeting, especially if you feel that there's something percolating, you know, kind of under the surface. You know, try to get to it before it becomes, you know, the bigger issue, and make people feel, you know, that they have an avenue and a process in place. Doesn't necessarily have to be a complete formal procedure, but at least that initial communication, you know, who do we go to? And who do we go to also, even if we want to just bring up general issues? You may not have an incident, but maybe you're just feeling that, you know, you're not being included as much. And that's where there has to be the interactive process. So I'm going to stress here as I close about having procedures in place. Having, you know, board education, which, you know, is more and more prevalent now in our industry, and bringing in management, counsel, and even someone else from the outside if we need to. And I will close with just stressing the need to have open communication with the members and residents and with the board and just as a community, because like I always say to people, you know, I go home at the end of the night, you all live together. So we need to find a way to coexist peacefully and happily with one another so that these issues do not occur as much. And with that, Angela, I will throw it back to you.
Thank you, Loren. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions for you at the end. Thank you very much. All right, thank you. So next up, we will be hearing from Sean Ahearn and Mike Luzzi of PeopleFirst Property Casualty Services, who will be discussing gross negligence versus negligence and who is responsible. Welcome, Sean and Mike.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you everyone for having us. We also have Dawn on the call, who is our Vice President. She will be having some input in the middle part of the presentation. And before we get started, I just wanted to touch on a little bit about who we are and a couple of brief introductions. The team at PeopleFirst Property and Casualty Services, a division of Ahearn, has been providing community association insurance risk management advice and expertise for association board members and their management teams for over 25 years. We at PeopleFirst are centrally located in beautiful Easton, Pennsylvania, and have many locations across the country. We have several community insurance risk management specialists, also known as CERMs, on staff, which is just one of the reasons that we stand above our competition. And Dawn will start with a brief introduction.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dawn Becker-Durnan. I'm Vice President of PeopleFirst Property and Casualties Community Association Division. And as Mike said, I have a CERMS designation. I'm also on the Business Partners Council for CAI National, and I sit on the Blue Ribbon panel for CAI South Carolina. So I'm going to turn this over to Sean now.
Thanks, Dawn, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I'm Sean Ahearn. I'm an insurance advisor for PeopleFirst Insurance with over 25 years of experience specializing in community associations. And like Dawn, I've also earned my CERMS designation, as well as my CIC, which is a certified insurance counselor. Over the years, I've written and published several articles focusing on issues facing community associations, and I'm currently vice chair of the communications committee of the new Keystone chapter of the Pennsylvania CAI. And over the course of my career, I've worked hard securing and maintaining coverage for well over 200 community associations throughout New Jersey.
Thanks, Sean. And my name is Mike Luzzi. I'm an advisor at PeopleFirst in the Community Association Insurance Division. I'm a certified professional insurance advisor, also known as CPIA. And I've been a licensed property and casualty agent for 12 years with a real estate background. And I also serve on CAI-New Jersey's Business Partners Committee. Today, we're here to speak about gross negligence versus negligence. Okay. As you read in the definitions here, negligence is the failure for someone to exercise ordinary or reasonable care, that is, what would be the conduct of an ordinarily prudent, careful person in the similar circumstances. Gross negligence would be an act or omission which is more than ordinary negligence, but is less than willful or intentional misconduct. Gross negligence can be negligence so severe as it demonstrates recklessness, disregard for others. Now, as we all may either be familiar with or know, insurance policies normally will cover negligence, but may not always cover acts of gross negligence. And how would the elements of negligence either apply to a board or management? We have duty of care. So duty of care would be to maintain the common elements. Breach of duty, that would be your failure to maintain those common elements. Maybe not updating walkways, knowingly pushing back a project, something along those lines. Causation would be the determination of whether that was deemed grossly negligent or negligent. And the damages would apply based off of the determination and how much the loss could have been. Now, in regards to a real life example, let's say a carnival operator fails to secure the harness of a ride and an individual gets hurt. The carnival could absolutely be held for negligence. But if the carnival operations and management knowingly know that the harness is broken and it also results in injury, they could be held grossly negligent and be in violation of their policy and may not have any coverage. Now, as we move to the next slide, there's a couple other ways of protections that are in place other than insurance. The first would be the Volunteer Protection Act passed, I believe, in 1997. To summarize this, if a volunteer meets certain criteria and they're held liable for simple negligence on behalf of a nonprofit or government organization, there would be protection and coverage. There also is some basic limitation for non-economic losses and punitive damages. However, this would not kick in and provide any coverage if somebody was found grossly negligent, using reckless misconduct, criminal misconduct, or anything of the sort. The second part here is the bylaws. There's indemnification and exculpation. Now, indemnification, as we know, is compensation for harm or loss. If somebody is held grossly negligent, they may not have indemnification. And exculpation is freeing somebody of guilt or blame. That would kick in if somebody was merely just negligent. If they were grossly negligent, they may not have that protection and they may be held without coverage. Now, as I turn it over to Dawn, she's going to explain how certain policies may trigger coverage in regards to gross negligence and negligence.
Thank you. So Mike just spoke to the 4 elements of negligence: the duty of care, the breach of duty, the causation, and the damages. Where we would expect some relief from damages that may be assessed by a court would be through an insurance policy. The governing documents not only provide some indemnification for the board and the association, but they also provide that the board should carry certain types of insurance. And most typical to governing documents is the commercial general liability, or the CGL policy, as well as a requirement for the board to carry directors and officers liability. The commercial general liability policy is intended to provide indemnity and defense against third parties who seek damages for bodily injury or property damage against the association or board members. So in that case, if there was, for example, a slip and fall, the board could use their Commercial General Liability Association insurance policy to provide coverage for any damages that may be awarded to that injured party due to the slip and fall. Now, the directors and officers insurance policy does not provide coverage for bodily injury or property damage. That's why it's really important that the commercial general liability policy be in place. The D&O policy is in place to provide coverage for wrongful actions alleged against the board or the association. The next slide, we're going to go a little bit more in depth over certain insurance coverages as far as what they will provide when the board is acting within the scope of their duties, performing in good faith, and not willful, wanton, or grossly negligent. And that's really important because the directors and officers policy may not apply if the board is acting outside of their scope of duty or not performing in good faith, but most importantly, grossly negligent. So in the next slide, speaking to umbrella liability, an umbrella policy is in place when the primary limits of the insurance is exhausted due to a claim. So for example, if the commercial general liability policy was exhausted by a claim, we could assume that the umbrella liability would provide the additional limits. Therefore, we stress very emphatically that the association should elect umbrella liability limits as great as possible, or as much as the board can afford. Now, I'm going to turn this over to Sean.
Sean, you're muted.
I see that. Okay. Somebody once said, I think it was Andy Warhol once said, that everybody will get their 15 minutes of fame. And I'm thinking this must be it. That's a joke. Okay. In my section of the presentation, I'm going to talk about real-life claims examples and how negligence of our fellow man may or may not affect the association's master policy. Now, it could be argued that most claims which happen at associations, with the exception of natural events like hurricanes, are not merely accidents, but actually negligent behavior on the part of unit owners. So here are some real life examples. See if you can pick out the negligence versus the bad behavior. All right. At the height of a snowstorm, before the snow removal contractor has had a chance to remove the snow, a unit owner goes to her mailbox to get her mail. She, of course, slips and falls and fractures her hip. Is this an accident or negligent behavior? In other words, would a normally prudent person do this? The next one would be a unit owner, while grilling a very fatty leg of lamb, steps away from the grill to check on the vegetables cooking inside. Of course, the fat drips down off the grill and it bursts into flames, and it sets fire to the condo building, eventually causing the entire building to burn to the ground. Is this an accident? Certainly. The unit owner didn't deliberately set the fire to his building, and a negligent act, no doubt. And my last example, a contractor is hired to fix a leaky pipe in the wall. Now, while soldering the pipe with his torch, the contractor sets fire to the unit and causes major damage. If the contractor did not properly protect the work site, he would be considered negligent and liable. Now, in all these cases, negligence did not interfere with the association's policy paying for the losses. And just for the record, in the case of the plumbing contractor, master policy would go against or subrogate the plumber, obviously, and look to collect from his massive policy. So in the last section of my presentation, I'm going to talk about what I call the mindset of the association's master policy. Yes, your association's master policy has a definite mindset. And what I mean is that it behaves precisely according to its coverage wording. Insurance policies are very carved in stone. And that's why it's important to get everything right before the claim occurs. So the policy responds to the cause of the loss, like fire, water, or windstorm, but really doesn't care about ordinary negligence. So the mindset concerns many board members. Often a board will feel it's unfair to the association and all the other unit owners to pay for a claim, which is obviously due to some other unit owner's negligence. Plus, they fear presenting too many claims will cause the association's premium to increase. There is some cause, of course, there's some truth to this, though insurance premiums are mostly dictated by other things. So the problem here is that since the policy doesn't care about how Mrs. Smith caused her unit and all the adjoining units to burn down to the ground, that she negligently left her waffle iron on unattended, and this is how the fire occurred, why should the entire association be subject to possibly higher premiums due to her negligence? And of course, my answer is always, well, Mrs. Smith contributed equally to the master policy along with all the other unit owners, and then therefore she has and deserves coverage. Of additional note, if Mrs. Smith had deliberately burned down her unit, the board and the other unit owners would really be irate, because even though this is a deliberate and criminal act, the association's policy will pay for that loss, since the fire was not caused by the association itself. So in conclusion, I believe, guys, this is the conclusion. Typically, association master policies are written to provide coverage regardless of any negligence. Though there are plenty of instances where some would rather not pay for someone's negligence, but the system really does work for us all. And I think that wraps up our program. We'd love to have your feedback and answer any questions that you may have. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll definitely be coming back at the end of the presentation for questions. Please remember, attendees, put your questions into the Q&A box so we can come back to them at the end of the presentation. Next up, please join me in welcoming Jamie K. Redden of Alliance Association Bank, who will be discussing the who's, what's, when's, why's, and how's of association lending. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you, Angela. Good morning, everyone. As Angela told you, I'm Jamie Redden with Alliance Association Bank. I've been at the bank for a little over 2 years now. Before that, I was a manager like you, like some of you at associations. I did that for almost 14 years before I went to the bank. And I went to the bank because I loved what I did, but I wanted to be able to help more associations. And I could do that when I went to Alliance. I didn't have to worry about my boss telling me that I couldn't be helpful if we weren't managing. So that's what I'm here to do today, to help all of you understand a little bit about lending. And the who, what's, when's, why's, and how's. And I was trying to figure out how to make this super fun for you guys. But let's face it, needing a loan is not fun. I was even going to pitch in there a little song like, who gives the loans out, what, when, why, how, you know, but that wasn't working either. So, and I'm not getting your feedback. So only Angela will be there to laugh at me. And thank you, Angela. I saw you smile. So that was helpful. So let me get started. I don't know that this is going to take up the full amount of time. I'm sure your questions will make that up though. But who can borrow? Associations, homeowner associations, timeshares, you know, you all can borrow. Ultimately, it's the board and the membership's decision to borrow. And I think more importantly than who can borrow is the question, can you borrow? A lot of times boards will come to us or management companies will come to us, and we have to look at the governing documents. We're anticipating that you've already done so and that you can borrow, but sometimes you're not able to do that. You may have to go through a process before you're able to borrow. If you haven't noticed that in your governing documents, we're going to pick up on it for you during the request for proposal process, and we're going to help you through that. But the entire process will go a lot more quickly if you know that you need to have maybe a vote of the membership. If you need to get 2/3 of that vote in there approving, letting the board borrow on behalf of the association, that whole thing is going to go so much quicker. And especially in the case of an emergency or an unexpected expense. So remember, can you borrow? Check your governing documents before you come to us. If for some reason you forget, we'll help you out with that part. The next thing is what do you borrow for? You borrow for capital projects. You borrow for reserve replenishments, unexpected expenses, which we just talked about. And there are different types of loans for that we'll get to later on in the presentation. But one thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned to you all is that, for those capital projects and even your reserve replenishment, you're gonna want to make sure that you evaluate the project. Know what it's gonna cost you, know who needs to be involved, have the engineers coming in and make sure you know that when you do this project, it's going to take care of whatever it is you're borrowing the money for, that you're not going to get into the project and then all of a sudden need a little more money or something else is wrong. So you want to prepare for that in the beginning, and maybe even before you look at your options for funding those projects. And with reserve replenishment, I wanted to make sure, sometimes we have those unexpected expenses and you have enough money in your reserve to cover that, which is fantastic. So you go ahead and you cover that expense with your reserves. You look at your reserve study, and in the next 2 years, you have some major projects coming up and you've spent all of your reserves. What do you do then? You call me. You look for a loan, and that's when we're going to do something that we call a reserve replenishment, but we are going to want to see those projects and that money is going towards something. So again, evaluate the project, listen to what your engineers are saying, your contractors, and be ready for that when you come to us. So that brings me to when do you borrow, and when do you start the process? Because it is such a process, we recommend that you start it well ahead of time, if at all possible. Again, with unexpected expenses, that's not going to even be possible. But you want to put as much into this and start thinking about it well ahead of time. You can work this into your budget. Before you even get the loan, you're going to have an estimate of what it's going to cost you. Look at your reserve study, know what you need to build up to, maybe even start collecting somewhat of a special assessment. There are costs involved even in lending. There's an origination fee, possibly. There are closing costs. You're gonna have to pay for a project manager to come in, for the engineer to evaluate things. So there are expenses before you even get the loan that you could start collecting for early, and being able to show that you've collected those assessments and that you're that prepared. That's a no-brainer for us on the approval and the underwriting. It's also going to get you a better rate on your loan. As soon as you can. And also take into consideration and know the cost of repaying a loan. Know that there are other things involved in that. You're going to be paying back interest. You want to take that into consideration, and know how long you can do a special assessment for, how long you can collect, and what your finances are going to look like, 3-5 years down the road. So let's move on to why. Why do associations ask for loans versus charging a special assessment? I would say the biggest benefit of doing a loan instead of doing the special assessment is that you know the amount to a T that you're going to need to pay back and special assess. Doing a special assessment to pay for a project is one lump sum. Usually you might be able to break it out, but that could put the entire association into some financial difficulty. What if someone doesn't pay that back right away, or pay their portion, or someone's struggling a little bit? With a loan, it's stretched out over a period of time, and you have more accuracy on what you're paying back. I think that's the biggest reason that associations come to us for loans versus doing a special assessment. And we look at that, we look at the entire process, and anyone that you work with or that you're borrowing from should be looking at that entire scope. If they come to you and tell you that it might be in your benefit to do the special assessment, rather than a loan, that's a financial partner that I would want to work with, because they're taking a lot of things into consideration that maybe you didn't. And if they give you that advice and you don't agree with it, talk to them. They will work with you, and they'll tell you, why they think that, and maybe even come up with a plan for you, to figure that out, or you may change their mind. And I think the most important part of this is how to go about it. And again, this kind of led into that. Finding the right financial partner is key. Vet a lot of banks, as many as you can. I will say this, I've said this my entire career, both in management and at the bank. Industry specific is key. They need to know what you're dealing with. Going to your local bank, they may have a great rate, but they're going to want collateral, and they don't understand that your assessments are what you have. They can't put a lien against a unit or against somebody's mortgage. We're looking at your collection, your history of collection, how well you've been at paying things back, if you've done loans before, your future, your plans for the future, and taking care of projects in the future. So those are all things that industry specific banks are looking at, that your local bank or your commercial bank may not understand. They might not even know to look for that. And that's not helpful to you. You want to know the types of loans and lending. There are emergency lines of credit, and those come into play with those unexpected expenses. In general, at AAB, we look at a situation that might involve the insurance company, where you're going to have that paid eventually, but you need to do the work up front. And so you're going to come to us and ask for an emergency line of credit, and we're going to evaluate that for you. There are lines of credit where you can draw out the funds that you need over a period of time, usually 12 or 24 months. And then there are term loans, 3, 5, 7, 10. We do 15-year. We don't like to stretch it out much further than that. But if you need more time, you can always put a draw, a line of credit where you can draw for the first 12 or 24 months, and then you term out whatever you've drawn over the course of time, whatever you need. And we will also look at that to tell you, you might want 15 years to pay that out, or you might want 3. You might want to get it done and over with. We look at that and we see that your liquidity and what you're bringing in cash flow, that's not going to work. So we may advise you to stretch that out over 5 years versus the 3 that you want to get it paid in. That's important as well, thinking about all of that. And then when you're getting your proposals from the different banks and the terms, you want to break that down and compare apples to apples. Make sure that you're considering all of the terms, where your funds are placed. Some banks have a requirement, especially the industry-specific banks, a requirement that you keep your reserves or maybe even your operating funds, and they're housed at the bank where you have the loan through. Some of them have no requirement whatsoever. They'll lend. Some of them won't even give you a term sheet. They won't even consider the loan if you don't have your funds placed with them. So that's something that you need to work out with your management group, and you need to make sure you're paying attention to when you're looking at those terms. They'll have different requirements, and that's just one of them. You want to look at your origination fee, your closing costs, what all is included. It's not just about that interest rate. Sometimes you make up for, a small difference in an interest rate because they're collecting that as a closing fee. So you want to make sure you're comparing those apples to apples, like I said. And you also want to look at the banks that you're vetting. You want to look at their stability, their history with loans, and keeping those loans. How many loans get refied, by other banks that might have a different rate or be running a special. How is that handled when you come to the bank for a refi? Are they matching a rate? Are they beating a rate? Or are they wanting to work with you? So look at the stability and the service, customer service. Ask other people who have done loans with that bank before. And the attentiveness of the person that you're working with at the bank. How involved in the process are they? How much did they prepare you for what's to happen? What are they looking at? Are they just selling a loan, or are they understanding that is, at the very least, a 12 or 24 month, relationship that you're going to have? Do you want to work with these people on a day-to-day basis? Are you going to call into customer service and have someone picking up the phone that you've never talked to before? Or are you going to be able to work with the same person every time you call, every time the board has an issue? Is that financial institution willing to come to a board meeting and answer the homeowner's questions? How involved are they before they've even lent you money or before you've signed a paper? So that's what I have to say today. Thank you all, and I will hang around and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Jamie, for all that information. And just a reminder, please put your questions into the question box. And I want to thank all of you that have sent questions in advance. And just a note that when we do address the questions at the end, they may be abbreviated just in the interest of time. And also, if you submitted questions that are not relevant, we may not be able to discuss them today, but please feel free to reach out to our speakers directly. Next up, please join me in welcoming Steve Morris of Morris Engineering, LLC, who will be discussing retention and storm drains. Welcome, Steve.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Steve Morris. I'm the principal of Morris Engineering. We're a consulting engineering firm that specializes in working with homeowners and community associations. So I was asked to speak with you about your stormwater management system, retention, detention systems, storm drains, etc. And I find this stuff fascinating and interesting, and that's why my family rolls her eyes whenever I talk to them about this stuff. So I could go on for hours, but we'll keep this to 15 minutes. By all means, if I prompt a question or you have a concern, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. So next slide. So why do you need a stormwater detention system? Why does your community have one? And the reason is to address flooding and water quality. The top slide that you see there shows a Central Jersey piece of land in 1972. And I believe that was a sod farm back in 1972. So along comes a rainstorm in 1972. The rain falls on the top left corner of that piece of property there, and it flows onto the grass, and some gets stuck in puddles, and it soaks into the ground and slowly meanders across, and finally, a day later, gets into the creek down in the bottom right corner of the property. And on the way, that water gets to drop any sediment that it picks up and trash, and there weren't a million soda bottles and cigarette butts and everything else for that water to carry into the creek. Then turn to 2017, back 2017, the bottom photo there is that same piece of property, very different. So now where you used to have sod and grass and such, you've got roofs, sidewalks, tennis courts. Very little of the water that hits the ground now can even get into the ground because it's all paved. So now when the little water falls in the top left corner of that photo, it hits the roof, runs into the storm drain, gets into a pipe, and shoots across into the creek, maybe in a matter of an hour as opposed to a day. So what happens is all the water that used to slowly meander down to the creek in 1972 rushes there now and can flood the creek and flood everybody downstream of that particular property. That's why you have stormwater management system, is to help control that flooding and prevent damage downstream. The other important piece of this is the water quality. As I say, back in 1972, the water, by the time it got to the creek, was clean. Now when the water gets to the creek, if you don't treat it, it's going to be full of trash, it's going to pick up sediment, it's going to have salt and sand from your ice control. And so that's why you need your stormwater management system. So if you go to the next slide, very quickly, how does it work? So the idea is that water all gets collected and funneled to a storage system. And that's what your detention basin is. It's a storage system. So it collects that water, and then that water can be let off the property slowly at the same rate it would have left in 1972. And also the water gets cleaned, it can be filtered, it can be perked back into the ground. And so when it leaves the site, it's nice and clean. So next slide. So how does that actually physically happen? What does that look like? So if you look on the right, you have, the left photo, water hits the grass. The grass is nicely sloped and pitched, and in the bottom left corner, there's a catch basin, and that water flows by gravity into the catch basin. On the right picture, the water hits the creek or hits the pavement and is pitched so it flows off into a concrete swale and goes to the stormwater management system. So that's the grading. That's getting the water started in the right direction when it hits the surface. So next slide. Then you got to get it into the system, and that's where your catch basins and other types of drains come in. So you can see on the left picture and the right picture, catch basins, we call them inlets, storm drains, and that water flows across and gets into those basins where it can get into the pipes. The center photo shows a stone trench. So the water that flows out of the woods on the right side goes into that clean stone, it falls to the bottom of the trench, and there's a pipe there that picks it up. So now we've got the water off the surface. You go to the next slide. Oh, I think you skipped one. We're missing a slide. Okay, well, there, nope, back. All right, so I'll skip by the missing slide. So basically, once this water gets into these catch basins, it goes into a pipe, and the pipes carry it over to your detention system. And the pipes are kind of the unsung heroes of your stormwater management system. And if they get clogged, if they settle so they're no longer sloped, they could be a real problem. So you need to understand that all this water flows via a whole network of pipes and goes over to your detention system. So we go to the next slide. These are your stormwater detention systems. So as I talked about earlier, the whole idea here is we're going to collect that water And we're going to hold on to it so it can't leave the site quite as quickly as it would like to. And when the water's sitting in there in these systems, gravity will settle out silt and debris. And then there's typically some form of a filter system to pick up the soda bottles, the tennis balls, and all that sort of trash. So here, the photo on the left is a very traditional detention basin. So stormwater comes into this area, floods it. You might have a foot or more of water sitting in here. And then within a day or so, all that water is left. And now you've got just your grass again. And that's a dry basin or a dry system. On the right is a retention basin. So retention because it's retaining the water, or it's a pond is another way to think of it. So same concept. So the pipes carry all the water, that dumps it into the pond. The level of the pond water rises, might come up 2-3 feet. And then over the next couple of days, that water, extra water slowly leaves the system and drains away. So, but you'll always have this pond level there. So next slide. Then there's an underground type system. So on the far left is a photo of a nice lawn area, beautiful trees. 20 feet underneath that is a stormwater detention system. And the middle photo shows Adolfo, one of our inspectors in that system. And to give you perspective, the pipes that you see next to him are 5-foot diameter pipes, and there's about a half a mile of them buried under that turf area. So that's there to kind of create enough volume that all that water in the storm can be stored there. It'll build up to about the top of Adolfo's head. And then over the next several days, that water slowly leaves the site and leaves behind a lot of the silt and trash that it might have carried off to the creek. So next slide. Then there's a recharge system. And so here the idea is you got to get the water back into the ground. And these are an old concept, but is getting a lot more new action now with some of the storm water regulations. So here, over on the right side, you can see in the back a big parking area with lots of garage doors. Well, under all that pavement is the recharge basin. So there's big concrete tanks, and they're slotted tanks. Each one of those is about 7 feet in diameter. And then there's lots of clean stone around them. So when the storm comes along, it dumps the water into these big tanks. And then slowly over the next few days, that water all perks into the ground and disappears into the aquifer. So it doesn't leave the site over through pipes, but it goes back into the ground where really we want it. And that water will also be cleaned and as it gets into the system. So the next slide. And the newer systems, and this is a relative term, is a biobasin. So in these systems, the stormwater goes into the basin, and the left side is a biobasin. It looks just like an unmowed lawn, but that's actually a highly engineered stormwater management system. And all that vegetation is there to clean the water that flows in. So during a storm, it's going to look like a swamp. It's all going to be flooded. And then over the next few days, that water going through all that vegetation, number one, all the trash gets filtered out by the grass and the things that are growing there. And then the water is actually treated by that vegetation. The bacteria on the plants eats the bad stuff in the water, and that water will leave the site cleaner than it ever was. The photo on the left shows a picture of one of those systems being built. They're very complex. There's pipes underground, then there's a layer of sand, then there's a layer of topsoil, and it's very organic topsoil. And then the plantings are highly engineered. You can't just throw any other plants in there. So they're very complex systems and they need a lot of care. So the next slide. And then these are your typical outlet structures. So these would be more for like a pond or the detention basin. And the idea here is you have these structures at the low end of your basin, and there's different outlets, different pipes at different elevations. And the size and the elevation of that pipe will control how quickly the water leaves the basin And the longer the water stays in the basin, the cleaner it's going to be when it leaves the system. So these are your outlet structures. So next slide. And then once it leaves there, it goes back to the creek where it always used to go for the last 3,000 years and flows off and does what water does. So next slide. So that's your system. And pretty much everybody should have one. So what do you need to do with it? These systems, new or old, absolutely need maintenance. And unfortunately, they don't really get the respect they deserve. So you need to develop an inspection and maintenance plans for your stormwater system. A newer community probably already has one in the master deed. And the photos on the right show the language from an actual master deed that it's right in there already. When these systems were built and approved, you're already being told how it's got to be maintained. So your inspection program might include things like it has to be inspected after every major storm event, and that would have specific numbers on it, certain heights, certain depths of water. And then it's regular scheduled program, once a month, twice a month, once a year, that sort of thing. And it depends on the system and what parts of the system. And then a plan for emergency response. If the system becomes plugged and it looks like it's going to overflow or cause damage, have a plan in place, have a contractor already on speed dial so you can deal with those things. So next slide. And this is the maintenance part. All of this type of trash is what we see every day when we go into these systems. If you don't clean this out, it's going to clog your system. It's going to make, add debris and waste downstream. So these are the kind of clean outs that need to be done. Next slide. In the basin, if you don't clean up the sediment and the soil, it'll clog the pipes. Even just a lot of brush or leaves in the fall go into the stormwater system and clog your pipes. Next slide. And this is an example after a big storm, we were called out, and just all of the stuff that got blown off the trees clogged the outlet structures. So again, you need to go inspect them after big storms and make sure everything's clear and it's going to flow properly. So next slide. So in closing, your stormwater system, it's a complex system. It's critical to preventing flooding and damage and maintaining your water quality systems. And that really affects everybody. So meet with your professional engineer, understand what your system is, develop the inspection and maintenance plan, and then follow the plan. And to follow the plan, you got to put it in the budget and you got to fund it. That's really important. So that's my 15 minutes of everything you never really wanted to know about your stormwater system. And by all means, reach out to me. I'd be happy to chat with you about any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next, please join me in welcoming Harold Berlowe of Denali Property Management, Inc. He will be discussing communicating with your community. Welcome, Harold.
Thank you, Angela. And I want to, good morning. First of all, good morning, everyone. And I want to thank CAI for setting this up and running this this webinar. And I want to thank all my fellow panelists. It's the topic, what I'm going to be talking about today is communication, mostly with your community, but the communication from my fellow panelists was excellent. So thank you. I appreciate it. Learned a lot in different areas. So let's talk overview. And again, I agree with Steve. Could talk for hours, days. So there are obviously college courses and degrees in communication, but we're going to try to keep this concise and give you guys a 30,000-foot overview of ways of communicating, best ways or suggested ways of communicating, and issues that come up with communication in your homeowner association or condo association. Communication, simply put, and that is that it is a way to convey information effectively and efficiently to another party. That as part of that, as we discuss in our managers meetings every week, is that good communication occurs when the other party understands. When the other party gets the information and understands it and then can respond or act on that information. So what we use is different methods, and I'll discuss a few of these, again, without getting into too much detail on any one, but the different methods are all important. And I know some people have asked, well, which ones are the best, which ones are preferred? It really does depend on your audience. It depends on who you're communicating with. And so it's very important to understand the party that you're communicating with or parties that you're communicating with. So methods of communication, including obvious, less formal methods, emails, in-person conversations, bulletin boards, text alerts, more formal communications, meetings, letters sent to specific party or parties. Now, meetings can incorporate all kinds of stuff, and those who are on the call who have been involved in their managing on boards and their communities know that meetings can involve everything from relatively informal board workshops to open board meetings to formal owners meetings with board elections and to other meetings with either vendors or outside people or professionals that are on the record. So it's very important. And by the way, meetings also, and I'll talk about this briefly, about the types of meetings these days happening much more in a virtual atmosphere than it is in person, or at least it has for the last year or so. There are pros and cons. We'll get into talking about that in a second. But one of the methods of communication and information sharing is things like this, things like a webinar, things that are informative that aren't necessarily designed to have a back and forth, but obviously have question and answers that you can submit and get answers to. But we also, as a matter of fact, Denali holds regular webinars for our clients as well as for potential clients. As a matter of fact, we have one this afternoon at 4:30. If you're interested, go visit our website at denalipm.com and sign up for it. It's free and it can be very informative. And the idea being is that we're trying to convey information that's important for our boards, for our communities to understand and to know. So understanding the engaged parties, who you're aiming your information to or your communication to is critical in terms of what method you choose. So whether it's your homeowners, the board is just communicating with each other, the association or board is communicating with the property management company. And I would also add the association at times wants to communicate with the outside community. So we can right through to the next slide. So what are the qualities of good communication? Whatever method you are deciding to use, the qualities of good communication, right? Efficiency, accuracy, obviously timeliness, and the tone you use to communicate. So when communicating, whether again, be sometimes, and we've all been there, right? We've all gotten emails that are either long run-on sentence emails that takes you a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes just to read, and you still don't understand, or they'll bury the lead and like the important piece will be down at the very bottom of it. I tell people that's when you're communicating, especially in an informal means with emails, etc., or text, it's very important to be concise, use a numbered list, use bullet points, use headings. This directs people so that you can look at this at a glance and say, what is important for me to know here? What is this communicating to me? Is this the communication I've been waiting for about this particular issue? Or is this something that's just notifying me of something coming up 3 months from now? So that's critical in terms of being clear, being concise, and highlighting the particular items that you want to draw attention to. As an example, when I'm sending communication or a property manager is sending communication to a board and there are certain action items we need a response to, we will highlight it in yellow, bold and highlight in yellow. And as part of our numbered list saying, these are the items that need board response within, and then set the time frame. So this again helps direct, it helps communicate the information, and then it usually ensures a response. And by the way, I just want to make a quick aside just to touch on something I think Loren Lightman had talked about, in social media as one of the methods of communication we've all seen the explosion of social media in the last several years. I strongly urge, and I get the urge of community members, owners, et cetera, to want to have a forum, almost a town square, to communicate regularly, to sometimes just vent, or just to find out some information about, hey, does anybody know a good dog walker, or such, et cetera. But we do discourage, especially property managers and boards, from utilizing social media for communication purposes and for the reasons that Loren had laid out, the liability, the control issues. Again, when you're directing communications, that's not the best place to do it. So that having been said, again, accuracy and timeliness. When communicating, right, it doesn't help to let folks know about stuff that occurred, right? Or that you want to give people notice that something's coming up and you're giving them 30 minutes notice. Not helpful. That being accurate and being timely means is that people can act on this information and respond as needed. And being proactive and being transparent is one of the things that a good property management company should do. And then of course the tone. Again, depends on the method you're using to communicate, as well as your intended audience. What's the tone? There are times when someone's going through a difficult time, or they've got a leak, or they've got a flood, or something has occurred in their unit or their community, and they're upset, they're emotional. It is important, right, to be empathetic, to listen to what the issue is. One of the quotes I've heard is that, you know, sometimes we make a mistake in our communication by listening to reply instead of listening to understand. What we're trying to do is understand what the other party is communicating, regardless of their communication skill level. And then being able to then appropriately respond, again, with empathy, with understanding, and build that confidence and trust that is critical to the good communication. So, and then we can move right through to the next slide, I guess. So what to do, right? I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to imagine that all of the folks who are participating in this, who are either served on board or part of our community association, at some point they've seen communication breakdown. I'm going to take a wild guess. So what happens, right? When communication breaks down, again, it oftentimes occurs because either an improper method of communication is being utilized, or the communication is not clear, or frankly, the communication gets emotional. So let's use some examples. We've all been at association meetings, and someone is angry or needs to vent or needs to let folks know that they're very upset about X, Y, Z. There are, as we know, strong personalities sometimes that can overtake that and generate an emotional response from the board or other owners and property managers as well. We're not immune to that. So how to do this, how to deal with, like, when communication breaks down or there's no communication, sometimes can even be worse than bad communication. So again, things that can be done. First is that and I tell people, being proactive, I tell my boards all the time, is that you can anticipate, right, that there are issues, there are known issues, included on the agenda. Make sure that, and agendas are critical to running good meetings. That's a whole nother topic. But make sure that the agenda is inclusive. It's not too detailed. It shouldn't run 3, 4, 5 pages long. It should be a very concise one-page agenda that is handed out to folks in plenty of time prior to the meeting so that they know what to expect. This helps control the meeting, right? We're leaving question and answers to the end. This helps to let people know that, oh, this is going to be dealt with in the second half of the meeting, or et cetera. So it usually will stop the chaos that can sometimes occur when communication breaks down. That again, if someone is being angry or difficult, there are ways, again, to ask them politely, but professionally and firmly, to please don't take the meeting hostage. Let's hold these questions. They are legitimate. We hear you. We want to dive into more detail on this, but we need to leave this for the appropriate portion of the meeting. Or sometimes some of these communications are better done outside the meeting, either in person or through an email exchange or through a conference call or a phone call that can be set up at a later time. But directing somebody there with empathy and with understanding lets people know that they've been heard, they've been recognized. This is important to you because it's important to them, and that it will be addressed in the appropriate time and fashion. So again, other examples, board meetings that sometimes have deteriorated because board members disagree about a certain path forward. Again, it's critical to let the parties be heard. It's critical to encourage and guide those parties to stay on topic. And one of my big no-nos in terms of communication in any type of communication is there are no ad hominem attacks, right? We don't attack the person. We can express the ideas, we can express our opinions, but we don't attack the individual. We discuss the ideas. And if we start to, that starts to occur, that has to be cut off. A good property manager who's running a meeting will know to cut that off, again, in any format that it occurs. So that's one of the ways to control, and also to make sure that and I do when I'm running my own meetings or communicating via email or phone call, is that I make sure that that people understand that, look, the idea here is to discuss the pros and cons of moving in a certain direction or discuss the issues at hand, but we need to be willing to compromise. There is no such thing, as we all know, of getting 100% of what you want 100% of the time. So if we start there, we'll get less than 100%, and we get an agreement on that, I think that usually you can reach some type of consensus. And then, of course, again, this is a bullet point on here about keeping a united front. Some of the ideas is that there will be, and this has come up in questions in the past, that board members will disagree and right in front of an owners meeting. And how to prevent that from happening. What I encourage my boards to do is, look, you can discuss your differences and you can work stuff out like in your executive or closed session meetings, but when it comes time to communicating with your ownership, to let them know what's going on, when it's going on, why it's going on, it's important to keep a united front. It's important to stay on message because that's when the communication will occur. When people start to hear board members arguing back and forth, they usually tune out and the communication stops. So basically wraps up like an overview of communication. And towards that end, be happy to entertain questions and answers from any of the audience.
Thank you so much, Harold. Okay, last up we have Asish George of BITS Consulting, who will be discussing electronic voting. Welcome, Asish.
Thank you so much, Angela. And thank you all for joining us. And thank you to CAI for putting this, webinar together. Next slide, please. All right, just a quick story about myself. So my name is Asish George, founder and technology strategist here at BITS Consulting. A quick introduction of BITS Consulting. Our story is, I am a resident of a high-rise community association. I was formerly on the board member. And with that experience, we ended up becoming an industry partner where my company decided to shift towards meeting the technology solutions of the community associations industry. Next slide, please. All right, Ballot by BITS. Ballot by BITS is one of our solutions. It is a comprehensive, fully managed voting solution specifically designed to help homeowner associations and residential property management with their election needs. So I'm going to be talking in general about electronic voting. And then I'm going to be speaking about it. Some aspects of it is based on our own service offering and how we've been able to successfully meet the needs of the industry for the past couple of years. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we go. All right. Does this spark joy? I know today we have a lot of property managers. We have a lot of homeowners. So, I mean, wherever you are, if you love this process, raise your hand, right? So it's all a question of, is the traditional approach of conducting elections, community association elections, effective? Is it efficient? Is it, is it the best use of our time? And I'm sure that all of you will agree with me, whether you're from the perspective of the board, the property manager, or even from the resident experience, there is nothing joyful about this process, right? Everything from setting up paper ballots, mailing it out, receiving it, processing it, counting it, all of that is an extremely inefficient process. And unfortunately, this has been one area of community association practices that has been a bit slower to adopt, a bit slower to change as the times has gone by. So I'm going to ask you all, what has Marie Kondo told us to do? If something doesn't spark joy, what do? We get rid of it, right? That's the option. If it doesn't spark joy, throw it out. But if we throw it out, what is the alternative solution? Next slide, please. All right, so Radbourne Law Regulations has done a phenomenal job of introducing a lot of complexities to how we manage our elections. But in this in all of these requirements on how the election process has to be conducted, there is a saving grace, which is Radbourne Law Regulations now explicitly allows for online voting or electronic voting as one possible way of conducting the annual election. However, there are three stipulations that must be met. Number one, the board must implement an electronic voting procedure. Number two, the association members must opt in to cast a vote electronically. And number three, voting must be conducted anonymously. So when we talk about electronic voting, frankly, that is such a vast, technical solution in what electronic voting actually can be described as. I'm going to be focusing more on online voting. And online voting is, something that I think a lot of you are already very familiar with, because in our professional lives, in our lives outside of the association, it's something that we're used to doing, right? Everything from filling out a Google form to filling out a SurveyMonkey form. A lot of that, it's a similar concept, except it is applied to the voting process with a much higher degree of security and auditability applied to it. Next slide, please. All right. Oh, it looks like the slides are out of order. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm so sorry. It looks like some of my slides are missing there, Angela. But so I will just talk from here. Just give me 1 second here. All right, so electronic voting, right? So what are the benefits of electronic voting? So number one, electronic voting, or again, as I mentioned, online voting, it offers a secure, tamper-proof, and auditable system of record. Now, regardless of which partner you go with to conduct your next online voting event, generally speaking, all of the partners tend to follow a similar methodology, right? So of course, you have the requirements gathering process where they try to understand the association, its unique needs, its unique bylaw requirements on how certain things have to be conducted. And typically speaking, they then take all that information and you are provided with an online portal where your community association members can go in and go ahead and cast a vote. But the beauty of this whole system is that it actually offers a secure, tamper-proof, and auditable system of record. And that is an extremely important thing to remember, because of course, coming out of an election year with all the questions that have been around the integrity of the process, what I can tell you is that online voting and with a reliable partner is actually more secure, with less chance of errors being introduced in the process. Of course, electronic voting also increases the efficiency of the process, right? From both a time and a money process. And the result is it reduces stress, right? So no longer do we have to mail out the packages. No longer do we have to collect collect the packages, have a process for opening it, have a process for counting it. When you have an electronic system that does all of this, all of this happens in the background as votes are being, the portals are being prepared, and the residents are able to log into the portal to access their ballot and to cast their ballot. This process, we have seen that it, of course, also ensures a higher voter participation in election. We have consistently seen 40%, 50%, 60%, and more participation in the elections. And of course, this is with less headache for the property management team. Addresses concerns for safety and social distancing. I'm glad we're coming out of, to some extent, of the lockdown and some of the best practices around that. But I hope that we don't regress back as an industry, that we go forward and we realize that this really is a better way, a more safer way, even in non-COVID times, for the safety of our community. And of course, when you partner with a third party, there is a degree of separation for the association and for the board, right? So there is never a question of, did the board influence the election result? Did the property manager have any way in which they tampered with ballots? When a neutral third party is administering the entire election on your behalf. And of course, on the slide that we're looking at, one thing that we know is it is green, right? It is green. And as we are dealing with climate change and all those other issues, this is something that is more and more important. This particular image is a little bit older. We have conducted many more elections since this graphic was put together, but that is one thing to remember, right? We're not wasting paper. We're not going through this archaic process that adds to our carbon footprint. Next slide, please. Oh, all right. So it looks like, all right. So that's it. So, electronic voting, what I can say is that, we have consistently seen that it definitely helps associations move forward in creating greater voter participation, in creating a much more transparent process. And the end result has been that it is seamless, as our tagline says, simple, secure, seamless, right? It is something that has definitely benefited the associations. Excuse me, and allowed them to ultimately save money and to ultimately have a much more stress-free election process. I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you all so much. I am getting over a cold, so I'm going to go off video for one moment.
Thank you, Ashish. Okay, now we're going to go into our questions. The first one is for Jamie. We are considering self-financing a project by loaning from our capital reserves to our deferred maintenance reserves. With CD rates so low, could this be a win-win by paying the capital reserves at a higher rate while allowing deferred maintenance to lower rate than the bank would charge?
I read the question and I needed to prep for this one. So first, Wayne, let me say that the manager in me loves that thought process. I love the idea. Of course, the banker in me is like, oh no, they're smart. They're figuring this out. I would encourage you to make sure this is something that you can do. Look at your governing documents, maybe talk to the attorney, talk to your manager. Make sure it's something that you can do. Borrowing from your reserves, sometimes there are very specific requirements for borrowing from the reserve for anything. So always, first thing, check your governing documents and make sure. talk to all of the people. And then I would suggest that you evaluate the process the same way the bank would. And that might be more easily done if you do request a proposal from a couple of different financial institutions, or even one, you know, that is industry specific and knows what they're doing, so that you can compare it. Look at your, you know, how you're collecting, how you've collected in the past, because if you borrow that money from your reserves, you have an expense, it's not getting paid back the way you thought it would. You know, anything can happen. If it's not getting paid back, how are you going to handle that if something else is due or needs done? So look at that, look at your cash flow, make sure, I wrote my response down here. Look at your upcoming needs, see how long it's going to take you to pay that back. I mean, the interest rate isn't everything, you know, that you'd be paying. Make sure you have enough money for emergencies, all your future projects. And then, you know, is it worth it? Is it worth saving that little bit of interest for, you know, managing and taking on that project, you know, of lending to yourself, doing self-financing? It's not easy. You're most likely a volunteer, and it's a process. You're going to have to work at it and with it. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is you said something about CD rates being low. Make sure you're shopping those rates, especially with the bank that you have your funds with right now. There always, you know, is room for negotiation on a rate. If you've got substantial deposits or investments in that bank, talk to them about that. See if they can do better on their rate and take that into consideration. If you're getting a nice rate for your CD that's in there, and then you borrow from that financial institution, or even if they require your reserves to be with their bank or your operating funds, they're paying you interest on the deposits that you have with the bank. That will offset whatever interest rate they're charging you on your loan. So take that into consideration as well. And there are other options for investing. You may have 250,000 FDIC insured at one bank, another 250,000 at another bank. There are products out there that will insure up to $14 million for one entity with all of their funds in one bank. And then they manage those funds for you and don't charge you a fee for managing it. At least we don't charge a fee for managing those funds. And that's going to gain interest too. The more money you have there, the more interest you're getting. So take all of that into consideration. I hope that answered your question. If it does not answer your question fully, feel free to reach out to me privately.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This one is for Loren. Can you hear me, Loren?
I can.
Okay, great. What recourse do I have if I feel that I am being harassed as a member of a board based on a protected class and not being afforded the opportunity to communicate with the association's legal counsel?
So that raises an interesting question, because you have all different types of issues that could arise. And as Harold was saying, different types of communications depending on where a particular issue is arising from. So one thing I wanted to reiterate that I'm not sure came across as strongly as before is the fact that the federal HUD regulations, the federal housing and urban development regulations that were adopted about 4 years ago, now require an association to really investigate, you know, any claims, wherever it's coming from, whether it's coming from a resident, a guest, a manager, even another board member. And, you know, even if it turns out that they may not have merit or may not, you know, merit taking any action, the association as an entity is still responsible for investigating to make sure that there's not an incident, let's say, of quid pro quo harassment, or, you know, harassment involving like a workplace, for example, a manager who's experiencing issues, which I've unfortunately come across. In terms of this particular question with a board member, this is one where the first option would be, you know, to try to get the member of the board, try to get the entire board and counsel together with the manager, everyone in a room, and try to hash it out before it goes beyond that. If, as it seems in this question, that may not be possible, maybe the person has tried, I would also recommend putting everything in writing to the extent you can, and saying, look, here's my feeling, whether it involves you directly or whether you are potentially relaying an issue that is elsewhere in the community and you feel that people aren't responding the way they should. Document your position, what you think should be done. Maybe prior communications, I tried reaching out on this date, and I have not received a response. Try to be as specific as possible so that it's in writing. Beyond that, if you still can't get any satisfaction, then it may warrant, unfortunately, going outside of the association, which to me is always, the second option. Whether it's going to the DCA or another agency that could potentially address whatever the issue is, whether it's you directly or whether you're passing on an issue that may be elsewhere in the community. That may be where you would have to say, look, I've exhausted all my remedies. I've documented my claims because, don't forget, as a board member yourself, you are held to, a particular standard. You have that fiduciary responsibility that if you are aware of something, you can't just necessarily say, well, I'm not going to address it because it involves other people. You would at least bring it to the attention of the rest of the board management, put it in writing. If nothing happens, then you may have to go outside and seek redress elsewhere.
Thank you, Loren. The next question is for Sean and Mike. The board is aware that there is a building code violation in connection with the common element and does not do anything to correct the violation. Would insurance defend the board?
I would say yes. The D&O coverage should definitely provide defense for something like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Harold. We have a couple of residents that seem to take over the owner every owner's meeting. How can we curb their question and input?
Yes, indeed. We've all been there. And I touched on it briefly, but I'll explain in a little more detail. The key to running any good meeting is having an agenda and having that agenda in the hands of all the participants well in advance. This sets the course. This lets people know that, yes, you're a strong personality and you may want to interrupt this meeting and you may want to have everybody hear what you have to say. And we've all seen people like that. They say their piece and then they storm out because they don't really want to participate. They just want to just squawk. But I tell people that, look, the agenda helps control. If there is someone who is, and I've in 35 years in this business, I've actually had to call the police twice. And actually have someone removed from a meeting. One time someone was literally drunk and abusive. That is not allowed ever. Another time someone was just so angry and was, again, attacking individuals verbally and was asked to leave, would not. So obviously that's a last recourse, right? That's the last stop. But if someone is being disruptive, it's important to stop them. Ask that they participate in the question and answer portion at the end of the meeting. Let them know that they've been heard and that the issue that they're raising is recognized as important, and that and if it requires, deal with it outside the meeting.
Thank you. The next question is for Steve. We replaced our catch basins to be aligned with changes in the safety requirements. The new ones are rusty and we are being asked to paint them, possibly with the same material used to seal coating. Is this wise? And what are the upsides and downsides of doing this?
That's an interesting question. So when catch basins, typically the frame and the headpiece get replaced, first you got to see what the material that was used. Did it meet the standards? And typically NJDOT is going to be the standard you want to look at. You have to expect a little bit of rust, and my guess is it's probably just some surface rust. It's not severe corrosion that's going to compromise the structure of the piece. I would give it a little time. If this is something new, I'd give it some time to see if that corrosion kind of wears away and weathers in. I would not recommend painting it because I don't think you're going to find a reliable paint that's going to stick unless you were to take all those pieces out, take them to a factory, have them properly prepared and reinstalled. And even at that, I don't think you're going to get any kind of warranty on a coating. If seal coat material goes on it, it'll make those pieces black for a while, but that will also wear away because it's not intended to stick to metal. So my first suggestion would be give it a little time and see if that appearance improves. To give very specific answers, obviously I'd have to see exactly what's going on and where it's occurring, which I'm always happy to take a look at a picture and have a phone call if that'd be helpful.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. The next question is for Asish. We are an over 55 community, which is aging. Many members do not use computers or refuse to use them. How may we implement electronic voting without excluding this segment of the owners, which is increasing yearly?
That is a great question. So what I would, the way that I would answer that question is, most electronic voting providers have multiple options in which a ballot can be cast. So, for example, with Ballot by Bits, we not support online voting via a unique website, a portal dedicated for your association, but we can also support telephone voting, where the residents can dial a 1-800 number, go, authenticate themselves, go through the prompts and cast their ballot. The other option is, once again, calling a telephone number and actually speaking with someone who will then cast their ballot for them. So of course, after authenticating. The other approach also is by using kiosks, right? So even if we don't use computers, most individuals are used to using an ATM machine or going to the self-checkout at their favorite grocery store. So having a dedicated kiosk that is set up in your common area is a great way for anyone who doesn't have access to technology, to computers or a mobile or a smartphone, for example, to be able to go there, authenticate themselves and cast their ballot that way. And then of course, no one is delusional to think that we're going to change our communities, overnight. We will, in order to not disenfranchise our residents, we will have to support, multiple voting methods, including paper ballots, right? Until there is a greater adoption of online voting. And this is why Radburn makes it so clear that you can do electronic voting only if the association member opts in, right? So they make it so clear in order to ensure that we in no way disenfranchise our residents. So paper ballots will have to be something that is also offered. What I will say is this, right? When you go with an independent third party, such as Bits Consulting and our solution, Ballot by Bits, irrespective of how the resident votes, everything is done through one centralized system. So you ensure the integrity of the process. So you have one database where all votes are recorded. You have one database that ensures that there is no double voting. Someone can cast a paper ballot and vote electronically and vote via kiosk. Everything is done in a way that, irrespective of the voting method that they use, the votes are recorded in one place and the votes are tabulated out of one system. So that is how you can, how we can slowly allow aging, 55 plus active adult communities, et cetera, to be able to transition to online voting. Now, I will say that we have successfully conducted elections for multiple communities, same demographics, and it is possible. Again, if they don't have access to computers, or access to a smartphone, that's one thing. But we have found that the process is so simple, so easy, and with everyone doing the rest of our lives, right? The rest of our lives involving technology, we have found that the adoption curve is not nearly as steep as we may think it is.
Thank you. This question is for Loren. Regarding, can you give us a legal perspective on regarding loans from reserves and replacement funds? Anything you want to add?
Generally speaking, I'll just give,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You ready for me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So generally speaking, loans against reserves, the reserves are there for a certain purpose and they're designated. So you will have a line item for whatever item it is that's supposed to be reserved for. If you start taking loans against whatever items you have in there, of course, it's money that's going to have to be made up. I think it's, especially in light of everything going on right now, and everyone's looking at reserves a little bit more closely, my thinking, my opinion is that reserves should really only be used for the purpose of which they are designated for, because the money will have to be made up. So if you take a loan against that money, somehow that money is going to have to be found later on. And depending on the depreciation of whatever item you're talking about, the life expectancy, you take that out, a couple of years down the road when that item needs to be addressed, suddenly it's the next group of homeowners that are going to have to deal with it. And the board better have a good reason as to why it took that loan, why it depleted that money or borrowed against that money when it's not there. And then potential assessment against the next group of homeowners is going to come in and they're going to say, well, why did the board make that decision and put the burden on us? I think reserves are going to be, potentially that's topic of another webinar, but reserves are going to be a hot button item. I know even in New Jersey, there are buildings now that we are looking at a lot more closely. And my experience, and I'm sure the rest of the panel can agree, is that more often than not, there's not enough money in the reserves. So if anything, we're going to be looking to beef up the reserves because they're not going to be adequate. And that whole discussion, well, let's not raise fees anymore, and they congratulate, everyone congratulate, oh, another year of not raising fees. And, I'd be sitting there even before recent events, I'd be sitting there thinking like, I know expenses have gone up. I know if nothing else, your insurance has gone up. There's no way you're possibly, funding for the reserves the way you're supposed to be and not raising fees. So I think going forward, before a board takes a loan, bring it to your finance committee, have open discussions about it. Don't do it behind closed doors. If you are considering a loan or putting any kind of encumbrances against any of the association funds, have that discussion in the open. Do not try to do that behind closed doors. If there is an extenuating circumstance, if there's an emergency, obviously talk to the insurance carrier also, because if you have a fire or a flood or something that's necessitating money, there may be other options. But definitely have that discussion and put it in the meeting minutes, whatever you decided, because down the line, you'd be surprised, you're off the board in a couple of years, there's a new board that comes in, why was action taken the way it was? And this is across, by the way, all these topics we're talking about. The best practice is going to be from now on, document, because you see, and I'll just mention briefly what's going on in Surfside. Everybody now is looking at every letter, every communication, every discussion that was ever had. That is going to be my feeling is that that's going to be the practice going forward. It already has been to some degree, but make sure whether it's in the meeting minutes, look at those meeting minutes a little bit more closely when you go to approve them. Make sure there are meeting minutes. Make sure you are approving them. Make sure at your annual meetings every year that you have meeting minutes from the year prior, and make sure your members are seeing the minutes. So all of these best practices are not just talking points, they are reality. And going forward, whatever decisions a board makes really should be documented very closely.
Thank you, Loren. Next question is for Jamie. Our community has expanded a large amount in the course of transition. The HOA board has undertaken a very large line of credit to pay the cost of the transition claim. Where in the governing documents does it permit the board to obtain this loan without first seeking approval of the residents?
It may not, but you can find that usually in the bylaws, and you'll want to look under powers and duties of the board. To see exactly what those documents allow. And again, the bank is going to ask you, have you talked to your attorney? We at Alliance, we require an opinion letter from your attorney before you can borrow. We need to know that they're on board, that they've looked at your governing documents, and they say, you know, you can move forward with that. We involve your insurance company. We need to be listed as a loss payee and an additional insured on your policy. So you'll want to make sure that your governing documents allow for that as well. I think it's important to expand on what Loren was saying. You know, this is really a team effort. You want to build your best team, managers, your financial partner, your insurance company, your attorney, all of your vendors. We work together more than you could ever imagine. And I love the New Jersey chapter. I love all the chapters that I belong to. I have so much fun with the New Jersey chapter though. And I mean, the vendors here are not, I don't want to say that we're not competitive. We're all competitive, but we all have something different that we bring to the plate. Even if we're doing the same thing, we all do something a little bit different. And we're going to tell you, we're not so competitive that we won't tell you if we're not the right one for you. So ask the questions and know that we're all a team, but those governing documents are huge. Look at your bylaws. And if you found out that the board borrowed money and they shouldn't have, contact your attorney.
Thank you. This next one is for Sean and Mike. If a community is surrounded by thousands of trees, would the association be considered negligent if a tree falls on a homeowner's property and they presently conducting tree work annually?
That's a great question. And just to touch on what Loren, Harold, and Jamie said about communication, transparency, documentation. In a case like this, if you're identifying and taking a proactive approach to either trees that are damaged or are decaying that are deemed very close to the property, you should have no issues with your insurance coverage regarding the damages it sustained by taking that approach. Healthy trees, considered an act of God, obviously going back to the governing docs would determine how that would be paid out on a homeowner's policy or not. But as long as you have documentation and effective communication of identifying and removing those trees on a yearly basis, those acts of God, as I said, you should have no issues regarding coverage.
Thank you. The next question is for Harold. Just a little more from your last response to last question. On top of that, how would you handle it differently from a board of trustees meeting? Different circumstances when there are people taking over, monopolizing the conversation.
Okay, good question. It's even better. During an open board of trustees meeting, board of directors meeting, one of the first things I do or any of our managers do when conducting a meeting, an open board meeting, is to remind all attendees that this is a board meeting. This is not an owner's meeting. Therefore, there is no there is no owner participation. I will often recommend to boards that they allow some question and answer period at the end to hear from owners, but in a very controlled way and in a very time constrained way. But no, it's a board meeting. That board is supposed to conduct business, and if someone's interrupting that or disrupting that, they're going to be asked to leave.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Steve. We have been told that we have to change our catch basins if we repave. Why is this?
That goes back to the water quality standards from the state. The issue is, as I showed that lovely picture of all the trash in your stormwater management system, the new heads and the new grates have smaller openings, so you don't get as much trash in the system. So that is a requirement that if you're going to repave, you're probably going to have to replace your grates and the curb piece.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Jamie, question, is there anything more a manager should know when considering a loan? Did we leave anything out?
I don't think that we left anything out. Just know that it's a process, and make sure you're ready for that. It's not something you to find yourself in this situation where you need money right now and you know, you don't have a way to get that, because it does take time. It, you know, especially if it's done right and done well, it could be anywhere from, I want to say 90 days, you know, to 2 years. I worked on one for a New Jersey high rise in Jersey City. Literally took us 2 years, you know, to get that to close, and only because, you know, we kind of went back and forth with different reports and everything else. So it is a process. Be prepared for it, and do your evaluations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Loren, can you suggest any proactive steps an association can take to foster inclusion in its community?
Yeah, I think the communication is key, as we've been stressing, but you know, with COVID now, that's a little bit easier said than done. You know, look, especially having the events to the extent you can, getting people to know one another, but also developing, you know, potentially a process to really evaluate issues as they're coming in the community. You know, I have some associations where we have more diverse members. And there have been situations, you know, and I'm thinking back even a couple of years ago, where somebody has asked, you know, we want to take this action, or we want to have an accommodation, let's say on the common elements, not even on your home. Let's say it's a condominium association, and we want to put something on the common elements that that will make it easier for us based on, you know, whether it's religion or ethnicity or whatever it is. And sometimes the boards don't even want to hear it. Sometimes the boards just say, oh, I've never heard of that. That's crazy. You know, we're not going to allow that. That's the common elements. We don't have to. I think now and going forward, that discussion has to at least occur. You know, rather than just dismiss it out of hand, there has to be at least a consideration. And for example, if it's something that may be considered to be dangerous, or may, you know, I had once, they wanted to have fireworks, let's say, a celebration of a particular holiday on the common elements, and it was a very densely it was a parking lot. And the board, you know, said no, but, you know, looking back at it, potentially could have said, all right, maybe we can have something small. Maybe if you move it over here, you know, away from the densely, you know, park area, away from cars, away from the units, maybe we could try to accommodate something, which may be a little bit less, you know, than what you want, but at least it's something. You know, there has to be an interactive process, you know, the same way we talk about interactive processes for, you know, reasonable accommodations based on a disability. You're going to now see interactive discussions based on different kinds of requests that come in. Or, you know, the same with the common elements. Can we use the common elements for a purpose that will facilitate a particular observance, let's say? And the board may not have ever heard of that observance, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't at least need to be considered. So I think the interactive discussions are going to have to happen more and more. And even if it's where you bring the requester into the board meeting, you know, and say to them, look, what are you looking for? What can we do to accommodate? Rather than just say no and not even have, you know, a discussion about it. I think the fact that people feel they're not being heard is what's leading to a lot of frustrations, both on diversity and inclusion, as well as all the other topics we've discussed today. I think being heard is just such a key thing right now, whether you're a manager, a board member, a resident, anybody wants to be heard about decisions that are being made in the community and the basis for making them. So I think that interactive process is going to be key going forward.
Thank you, Loren. Ashish, is there any training available currently for electronic voting for work in the systems?
That's a great question. So so our process is, you know, when a board or a property manager engages us to learn more about electronic voting, we actually do a demo that takes them through the entire process. So in terms of, and this, you know, and generally speaking, we invite everyone from the property manager to the board members and any key, you know, committee members to join us for that process. And during our demo, we will take you from everything from the election goes live, you know, you get the email to cast your ballot, and then, you know, how we're able to quickly tabulate the results and provide the results to you. So no training per se. However, we do a full end-to-end life cycle of the election process so that everyone fully understands how it works.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes. I want to fit in 2 more questions really quick. Harold, what are the benefits of virtual meetings versus live ones?
Well, several have spoken to that, Asish and Loren. Look, there are pros and cons to all methods of communication. Some of the pros for virtual meetings is oftentimes you can get much more participation from folks, but some of the downside is, of course, is that some of the community don't have access to the equipment or technology. That's why we often recommend, especially these days when things have started to open up, is you can hold both simultaneously. You can have an in-person meeting with a virtual component. Again, so other things that are beneficial, as Asish was pointing out, of like being able to vote electronically, utilizing. You're able to present more information oftentimes in a virtual setting like we're doing here. It can usually be easier to control. People were asking questions about difficult owners or participants. You can oftentimes much easier control them from a virtual setting than you can in a live setting. However, look, there's no doubt about it that we are social creatures. Being able to meet in person and interact, there's so much that is oftentimes lost in a virtual setting, body language, inflection, etc. That is still an important portion of communication.
Thanks, Harold. Appreciate that. And Steve, one last question. As storm drains dump into a field that looks swampy, we want to dry it out and plant grass. Can we do that?
Probably not. What you call a swamp may be a biobasin. So before you have the landscaper go mow it or start trying to drain it, absolutely call your engineer, because if you were to do that, you could really cause some damage to the system and really run into some big costs to restore it back to the way it's supposed to be.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I want to remind all of you that the presentations will be emailed out to all of you, and it will include information on the panelists. Please feel free to reach out to them. We will also be sending out a survey, and we appreciate if you could fill that out. It really does help us with future programs. So one more time, a thank you to Loren Lightman of Wallack, Sean Ahearn and Mike Luzzi of PeopleFirst Property and Casualty Services, Jamie K. Redden of Alliance Association Bank, Steve Morris of Morris Engineering, Harold Berlowe of Denali Property Management, and Asish George of Bits Consulting. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, attendees, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.